That, Madam Speaker. I'll get my chair out of the way here. Well, I'm very pleased, Madam Speaker, today to have the opportunity to rise in the House and add my comments to the throne speech debate. I also want to welcome at this time my new colleague, the member for Scarborough-Rouge River. I had a great time visiting with him and campaigning with him and his team during the recent by-election. I know he's going to do a great job representing the people of Scarborough-Rouge River. In fact, Mr. Cho's performance has already triggered quite a bit of action from this government. That brings me to the subject of today's debate and the throne speech. Each speech from the throne is significant, and once again I was honoured to sit in my seat as the member of provincial parliament for the riding of Sarnia-Lambton for what I believe is the sixth speech from the throne in my time here at Queen's Park. I will note that this speech from the throne will be one that I will remember probably more than any of the others, with the exception of maybe my very first, because it was this speech from the throne that the government finally acknowledged that energy prices are out of control and that something needs to be done. Madam Speaker, rising energy prices have been an issue in my riding for my constituents almost as long as I've been the member for this the legislature. I was doing a little research through the official Hansard documents over the summer, and I've been raising concerns about the rising cost of energy all the way back to March 9th of 2009. The debate that day was about the Green Energy and Green Economy Act, and I know the member from Wellington Halton Hills will remember that well. And here's what I said more than 7 years ago during that debate, quote, "I feel that this bill, the Green Energy Economy Act, will do nothing but add and impose new costs on the energy system and consumers. That what it in fact is going to do is create a new bureaucracy with very little accountability to both the ratepayers and to the legislature. I also don't believe that the government has really figured out how much this is going to cost consumers at the very end, and I believe that their initial estimates are way off." End of quote. I'll just remind this House that the Minister of Energy at that time insisted that the bills would only increase by about 1% as a result of the Green Energy Act and Green Economy Act. I think that what we have seen play out over the last 7 years is the warnings and criticisms of the bill by the official opposition put forward during that debate has been pretty much become the reality on Ontario. Constituents now have triple-digit delivery and global adjustment charges on their bill each month. Rates have more than doubled since 2009. When I made those comments in March of 2009, Madam Speaker, the off-peak price of energy was 4 cents per kilowatt hour, and the on-peak was 8.7 cents per kilowatt hour. Today, off-peak is 8.7 cents per kilowatt hour. On-peak is 18 cents per kilowatt hour, more than double the price in just 5 years. For the average family, Madam Speaker, electricity costs are up more than $1,000 a year since the Liberals first took office, 2003. How does that happen? Let's look at the facts. May 1st, 2015, rates went up $68. On November 1st, 2015, rates went up $53. On January 1st, 2016, rates went up another $96. On May 1st, 2016, rates went up $38. This was one that really got under people's skin because the government justified the increase by saying that people hadn't used enough energy over the winter months, so they had to recoup those costs for the energy producers, who they in fact signed contracts with the government. So that's the government, they screwed up. They made these contracts, and then cry foul when they didn't take enough income in. In all, in just 1 year, from May 1st, 2015 to May 1st, 2016, rates went up for the average family by $255 a year, and it's not stopping there, sadly. On November 1st of this year, rates are likely to climb again. No matter which way you slice it, electricity prices in Ontario are going up. It's not just building Ontario up, it's raising on prices in Ontario, and they're going up. The Ministry of Energy's own long-term energy plan predicts that the average monthly residential energy bill will increase between 26 to 36% over the next 15 years, or around $500 to $750 per year. The official opposition believes the increase will be more like 42%. If there's anyone who thinks excuse me, that the government's numbers aren't too bad, let me just remind you that the previous Minister of Energy back in 2009 predicted only a 1% increase. I would take any number that this government publishes with a grain of salt. The fact is, we just don't know what else this government will do to mismanage this energy file. It's certainly had a lot of people over the years mismanaging it. They certainly took the opportunity during the throne speech to pat themselves on the back. In fact, I thought they'd have to call the ambulance to break their arm patting themselves on the back. We don't know how many more expensive energy contracts they will sign, or if they will roll any more costs like those of the cancelled gas plants into the global adjustment charge. As I said, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the fact that during the throne speech, I heard there would be a rebate of the provincial portion of the HST and energy bills. That is something that the PC caucus has called for in this legislature for many years. I remember speaking on it back as early as 2009 that it was a mistake to do this. I'm optimistic that this means the government will be prepared to do even more on this file, because in reality, the government is estimating this will save the average Ontario household only $130 per year. That works out to 36 cents per day. I think that's been brought up in the House more than once since the throne speech. In relief, that's hardly the lifeline that people have been asking for, Madam Speaker. The former Minister of Energy once said that the price of energy, get this, was only going up by the price of a cup of coffee. I wonder what the honourable member from Ottawa West Nepean thinks about the amount of relief that his government is offering now. You can't buy much of a cup of coffee with 36 cents. I have a Keurig at home, and I know that the Keurig cups are a lot more than 36 cents a cup, so probably wrong about $1. Really, removing the provincial portion of the HST from energy bills is too little and too late. It doesn't address the real reasons that energy has become so unaffordable in Ontario. It doesn't address the real reason that energy poverty has become a real and overwhelming issue across Ontario, including in my riding of Sarnia-Lambton. It is unconscionable that Ontario, the former economic engine of our country, that people, seniors, single parents, low-income and middle-class people, Madam Speaker, are struggling to afford the very necessities of a modern existence. Necessities like electricity. For many of us who live in small urban Ontario or cities, electricity is a part of the energy mix that we use in our day-to-day lives. But for others who live in rural parts of Ontario, which represents a big portion of Sarnia-Lambton, where they don't have access to natural gas for heating or cooking, they depend on affordable electricity. After 13 years of this government, there are many residents and families across Ontario who once again this winter, are going to have to choose between heating and eating. I want to acknowledge Global News for doing a very good series of reports on this issue this summer. And I also want to acknowledge the freelance writer Jim Merriam, who has done a number of enlightening columns this summer on the fact that this government has rigged the electricity system so that rural Ontario customers pay higher delivery charges, usually by as much as 2 to 3 times than the average urban household. Parker Gallant, a well-known retired banker, also has done a number of good columns, and I look forward to those every few weeks. The official opposition has been challenging this government's management of the energy system for some time. Hopefully, the media will maintain its focus on this issue so that more Ontarians are aware of the real facts the Liberal policy has had on our province. I will continue to do my part to draw attention to this matter through various means, like today's debate on the throne speech. I also have a petition on my website calling for action from the government to reduce the total cost of electricity paid for by Ontarians, including costs associated with power consumed, the global adjustment, delivery charges, administrative charges, tax, and any other charges added to Ontario's energy bills. I've already received well over 2,200 signatures in only a few days of making this petition available. With the petition, I've also asked that people share any comments they have for myself and the Premier and the Minister of Energy. Madam Speaker, these comments are alarming, and I promise my constituents I'm going to share every single one of these comments with the new Minister of Energy so that he understands how serious this issue is. I'd like to just read a few of these comments into the record. Linda from Sarnia says, quote, an 8% reduction is not going to cut it. Stop overcharging in this province, end of quote. Melissa from Sarnia says, a family shouldn't have to decide between rent or hydro. The prices are getting out of control. All this extra energy created by all the green energy projects should be helping to bring down costs, not drive them to ridiculous prices, end of quote. Tim from Petrolia said, you are going to drive industry and businesses out of Ontario and put me in financial stress. In fact, you already are, end of quote. Pamela in Sarnia says, I live in a one-bedroom house. My bills have been been between $1,000 and $5,000, and we're trying to retire. What are you thinking?" End of quote. Finally, Tara from Sarnia says, this is a quote, "I bought energy-efficient appliances. My hydro bill goes up. I cook on a barbecue more because it's summer. My hydro bill goes up. I put in a clothesline to run the dryer less. My hydro bill goes up. I go around turning off lights and things like my parents and grandparents did when hydro was cheap, and my hydro bill goes up again. Now I'm going to have to start paying the new carbon tax. Enough is enough." End of quote. Madam Speaker, these are just 5 comments picked at random from over 1,000 comments that were submitted. And I'm sure the government members, the backbenchers and the cabinet ministers, they have to, like Sarnia-Lambton's not unique. I mean, I like to think it's unique, but I'm sure it's not unique in higher electricity prices. I know that the government finally must be hearing, and that's why they did this so-called reset or reboot. The jury's still out on how much of a reboot it is. The last comment should be a red flag for the members of this House. During the throne speech, it was made clear that cap and trade is a scheme of this government is going ahead starting in January 1st, 2017. I've referred to it a number of times as cap and tax. The government is estimating that cap and tax, cap and trade, will cost about $156 annually per household. That number right there should grab everyone's attention. With one hand, the government is offering a $130 discount in the amount of the HST provincial portion they charge in electricity. But at the same time, they're adding $156 in cap and trade costs for other daily essentials like gasoline to get to work, natural gas to heat your home, and any product you buy in a grocery store delivered by a truck. But this estimate from the government doesn't tell the whole story. Madam Speaker, the $156 per year per household estimate only represents the 4.3 per litre charge of gasoline and 3.3 cents per cubic meter for natural gas. Madam Speaker, there are major rumblings in, okay, I want to read that, meter charge to natural gas that consumers will be purchasing directly. It doesn't represent the increased cost of products that consumers will now pay at the grocery store or the pharmacy as companies pass their additional business costs on to consumers. Cap and trade raises the price of all goods and services that consume fossil fuel energy as part of their operations, which, as much as I can figure, is pretty much all of them. Private sector estimates of the impact of the cap and trade system predict household costs are more likely to increase by close to $400 a year. Madam Speaker, this is just the official opposition making these warnings to the public. And I would like to comment on about cap and tax, cap and trade, while I have a couple of minutes here. There's almost $100 million investment in my riding that was announced back in 2015. I was there with the Premier at the time. And now there's serious concerns. It's been on the local media, Blackburn News, that they're concerned that this investment's been put on hold. We're very concerned back, and it's a lot of good jobs. It's a reinvestment. It's in a major business there. And Premier Wynne and Sarnia-Lambton at that time in 2017 or 2015 said this investment, it was an investment by the private sector, no government money, was a vote of confidence in Ontario's chemical industry. But I fear that this cancellation or even pause or suspension of this project is a vote of non-confidence in this province and in her government. The major rumblings in my riding of Sarnia-Lambton are the cap and trade on top of the highest electricity prices in North America, and the litany of government regulations has made overall business climate in Ontario untenable. I'm concerned that in the near future we are going to see more investment plans scrapped and the much-needed economic growth checked off by cap and trade scheme. Now, to get back to this scheme, I was watching Global News one night, at least a year ago now, and the former Liberal Minister of Finance, the Honourable Greg Sorbara, called the cap and trade scheme a $1.9 billion, quote, flow-through tax, end of quote, on consumers. I just want to read from this quote from Mr. Sorbara from his appearance that spring on TVO, The Agenda. Former Minister Sorbara said at that time, quote, cap and trade is a system where the government sells to industry an imaginary product called carbon credits, and those industries pass those costs, the $1.9 billion in this case, ultimately through the system, and it gives rise to higher prices at the gas pump for the gas that heats your and my home, and ultimately for virtually every product that we buy, end of quote. Mr. Sorbara later went on to say that there's no evidence anywhere in the world that the cap-and-trade system actually does work to significantly reduce carbon emissions. And until I see that evidence, Mr. Chabert speaking, I have to be a little bit skeptical about this whole scheme, other than it's going to bring a whole lot of new money into the government. End of quote. Madam Speaker, those are the words of the former Liberal Minister of Finance, the only Liberal Minister of Finance for this government who has ever tabled a balanced budget in the last 13 years, if I remember correctly. He raises some very serious red flags about this cap and tax scheme. I get the sense from his comments that he doesn't actually believe this plan will work. And I have to say I agree with him. I didn't agree with everything he has ever said, but I agree with that. This has to be troubling for this government because they have been promising the public many wonderful things, baubles in the window, like the subways and light rail transit, big rebates on electric cars, and then free electricity for these cars. But the carbon market in California that this government has attached itself has collapsed and failed to deliver the revenue in 2 consecutive carbon credit auctions. So what is this government going to do to live up to all the promises it's made? Will other important programs like health care and education continue to be squeezed? Unfortunately, this government's health care legacy has become cuts, not care. 13 years of scandal, waste, and mismanagement has taken away funding for essential health care services. I have been meeting with constituents on a more frequent basis who are very concerned with the cuts they are noticing to health care. They are seeing it in home care, at the hospital, and in long-term care homes. There's a feeling that this government is not supporting the frontline nurses, doctors, therapists, and personal support workers in their role as health care providers. The government is rationing health care to residents in Ontario in an attempt to squeeze more dollars from the system. At this point, I'd like to point out that the government is still not providing the free shingles vaccine to seniors aged 65 to 70, which was promised in the February budget. My office has contacted the Minister of Health's office several times asking when they will fulfill this promise, and we can't get a straight answer. Seniors are calling my office because they want this vaccine. I certainly hope the minister will deliver on his commitment to seniors. It would be shameful not to. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the fact that the Liberal government is finally taking some action to reduce the cost of energy for the people of Ontario. Expensive energy has been the #1 issue in my office for the last 7 years. Every spring, we hear from dozens of people who are being cut off by the power company because they have fallen so far behind with their energy bills. Not a month goes by that someone doesn't present at my constituency office with an energy bill they simply can't afford. Last year, Blue Water Power in Sarnia had more than 3,500 residential accounts in arrears at the end of the year, representing $527,000. That's up by more than 1,000 residential accounts from just 2 years earlier. The fact is, the government has claimed it has done things to mitigate the price increases for the vulnerable and middle class, but they've just not worked. More needs to be done. Earlier, I just read 5 of the more than 1,000 comments that I've received through my website regarding the high price of electricity. I'm going to present every single comment I've received on this issue to the Minister of Energy and demand that more be done. So far, the Minister's performance in this file has been lacking. The people of Sarnia need this Minister to take real action, to create affordable action. I always like to be the optimist. I hope that we don't have to wait until the next provincial election and the next throne speech to see real change on the energy file. Madam Speaker, I've enjoyed the opportunity today to stand up and speak. It's always been a privilege to stand here representing the residents of Sarnia-Lambton. It's a privilege. I look forward to it, and I look forward to the rest of the debate this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions and comments. I recognize the member from Niagara Falls.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate having the opportunity to stand up again.